How are you?
I am doing good. Hello, hello. Firstly, I just want to say thank you so much for agreeing on doing this. It's quite a conversation that I try very used to tackle. In the society that we are in, we don't usually talk about men's mental health actually, and also the fact that is this month is Men's Mental Health Awareness Month. So I'm so excited. Be- Before with with my statement, my opening statement towards you, I'm not sure if you know Brené Brown. She's a social worker from the States, and she said she said that she didn't interview men on her study after she met a man who said that you say we should reach out and tell our story, and we are judged, and when we do, we are judged, and And don't tell me it's from guys and coaches and dads because the women in my life are hard on me than anyone else. So I feel like in terms of women in terms of I don't want to in a way judge women in a way, but at the same time the norms have out there have seen that men should do everything and their mental health doesn't mean anything. So through our conversation, we'll be able to touch on those things, and definitely your book is strong and it's quite a fascinating book. And one would, in a way, there's a line that you wrote where as you said that who are you as a woman to write about men? So probably we'll dive deeply on the book. Actually, I would just want to touch on it in most of these podcasts. So with those words, I would like to welcome you to Mental Health. Thank you so much for this.
Thank you so
As
much for having me.
as my opening statement, what intrigued you of talking about mental health? What made you passionate about talking about mental health when it comes to men?
So, I actually came into the mental health field um, very, I guess, very spontaneously, maybe. I didn't grow up with any awareness of the fact that there were counselors or therapists. That was not part of um, what I experienced growing up. And it was only later in life that when I started dating, I realized that I had no idea how to date. And so I went to a therapist because I didn't know how to do relationships. So I really went into the mental health field from the relational place. And so that's why I'm passionate about it, because I see how healthy relationships really impact mental health and vice versa. Unhealthy relationships can have a devastating toll on mental health as well.
And in terms of working with couples and how, in a way, let me face my question. Let me move away from that question. I'm just thinking things here. Um, your book is dedicated to men and those who love men. What inspires you to write from, especially for men? What gap did you see in existing resources that this book aims to fill?
Yeah, so one thing that I noticed in becoming a therapist and as I started practicing was that there were a lot more women who were therapists than there were men. And so the field was overrepresented with messages for and about and by women. So a lot of books on self-help were for women, and a lot of resources, even when it came to relationships, were written with female audiences as the target. And so there just wasn't the same amount of resources directed towards or available to men. So I'm all about equality. So I wanted to make sure that it felt balanced. So I wrote my book for men.
Mm, 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 mm. And through your own experience as a therapist, would you say that in writing this book, it really shaped your understanding how men are perceived in not only just in relationships, but the society as a whole?
Yeah, and I think that was not just writing this book. I feel like this book was the culmination of everything I had learned up to this point, which of course, I'm still learning. But um, yeah, I went into the field of therapy knowing that I wanted to work with men, knowing that I wanted to focus on relationships. And in order for me to do that as a woman, I had to understand the male perspective if I was going to work with heterosexual couples or with men in relationships. So I really focused my education, my learning on trying to understand kind of the male psychology and the male perspective when it comes to relationships. And
Mm,
then, yeah, that informed my work.
mm, mm. And as I mentioned earlier, that there are society has looked upon men in a different way when it comes to mental health. What are some of the challenges that you have seen as a therapist within the society when it comes to men challenges?
Yeah, there's still a lot of stigma around men discussing their mental health needs. Um, there's, yeah, I think there's a lot of pushback um, around providing men the same support that women have gotten. Um, and a lot of it is, it's this very complicated place, I think, for a lot of people to be, is, you know, the world has changed very, very quickly. And like you mentioned with Brene Brown, is not everybody is ready to hear about men's mental health struggles, whether that's from men or women. And I think that's part of the challenge is, you know, men need the same level of support and care that is available to women, but not everybody wants that. And whether that's men saying they don't need it, or there's women saying men don't deserve it, or just a variety of stigmas or preconceived ideas about what it means to be a man with a mental health issue. I think there's still a lot of resistance, and
Uh,
also lack of resources is still an issue as well.
and with me having done this podcast for the last 4 years, I realized that as much as I am forward when it comes to mental health, one thing I realized is the fact that I haven't done much as I think I should have because of the thing you mentioned about the stigma. Many men don't, in a way, don't want to talk about it, don't want to be seen as weak. That's the thing. That's what the word that most people use when men talk about their mental health. When men complain, and whereas they end up looking up to your David Goggins, your Andrew Tate, in terms of those type of models of not talking about the things. As much as it's a good thing to exercise and work on your body, but at the same time when it comes to mentally, that's what causes a lot of suicides when it comes to men, and it's quite alarming. And in terms of talking about it, one thing I feel like the one thing that is actually misunderstood as men, as I'm talking as a man, and I've seen it around my friends that we won't be afraid to talk about our own feelings to each other. But when they are women, we are very vigilant because the women have, I would say, this reputation in terms of when it comes to men of just using things against them or just insulting them or say, as I've said that in terms of you're weak, you shouldn't talk about your feelings. What kind of men are what kind of a man are you? And it goes back to that thing of not knowing what a man is. What is a man? And I had a conversation with this other guy. I think it was 2 weeks back, whereas we spoke, we really dive deeply in terms of what have the society has seen us as men in a way of they seen us in a they it has ended up in a way of how can I put it that women can define what is a man. And I find that very alarming because women don't actually understand our struggles in a way, as much as sometimes we put the tough face of saying that we are okay, we are fine, but at the same time, we're going through a lot. And as I mentioned that they bring you Brown's quote, whereas the most people that are hard on me are the two women in my lives, and something that we actually don't look onto. And it's something that as much as we are talking about it, it's something that we should put more emphasis to. So, my follow-up question to you is, I saw this guy on Alex Williamson's podcast where he spoke about femininity and masculinity, and that he believes that men should integrate two of those things. So, in your professional experience, have you met those kind of people, and how have you perceived them in terms of how, yeah.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And that's kind of the thing, right? Is that a healthy person is able to integrate all parts of themselves. They're a whole person,
Mm,
right? Is that's a balanced individual, is somebody who can embody and take aspects of every different whether it's a masculine trait, a feminine trait, they are able to use any of them to be their full selves. And they're not cut off from any one part of themselves. And I've absolutely, I mean, that's part of the goal of therapy, is to empower people to be fully embodied, where nothing is off limits to them. They're able to embody it in whatever way they choose to. Right. So
mm,
if they want to be vulnerable, they can be vulnerable. If they want to be, performative and they want to be stoic, they can be. But they also have the capacity to go to any end of the spectrum without worrying they're going to get stuck there. And
mm,
that's really what personal power is the ability to use all the skills that are available, in a way that is yours, that is true to you.
mm. And I just want to just add on the thing you spoke about in terms of stigma and the thing of therapy as filled with women. And in terms of, I would like to agree with you with that because as men, we, because, for example, there was this one time that I wanted to attend counseling in a way. And I found out that there was a woman, and I ended up not going because I felt that thing that she wouldn't understand me, she wouldn't understand my struggles, and I'm talking to a woman. And I feel like it's also something that is cultural, and the way where I grew up is the fact that women shouldn't know a man's problems because of the things that I've said that you're not men enough in a way. And also that thing, it's a cultural thing. It's not something that I came up with. It's something that I was raised in. It goes back to something that I saw, whereas this guy was explaining that in front of your kids, you should hug your wife more in terms of hug your wife in a way that it will perceive to the child that it is something that is positive, not something that it's negative. And when it comes to if they within their friends, they don't have this thing of hugging themselves. I want to change it in this perspective of mental health, being able to talk about your mental well-being, having to show them that you cry. And it's something that another thing that really, really, really hard for men to do is cry. And I don't want to lie, and also I struggle with it because I don't see that in a way I grew up in not knowing or not seeing the point of crying. If I cry now, who will fix my problems? And it's something that has been within my mind, and and I've come to a point of trying to change that. I've come to a point of trying to realize that if, it's not worth it. If I don't talk about my feelings, I will internalize them, and when they blow up, it will be bad for me. I would have breakdowns. So something that
Mm-hmm.
I've learned from in terms of when they breakdowns, and I try by any means to hide it. And
Mm-hmm.
through your, I just wanna focusing on the book, you spoke about shifting gender dynamics on
Mm-hmm.
on your book. How do you think changing roles and expectations for men and women have impacted relationships today?
So I think you bring up a really important point about the impact of culture. Um, there are lots of different cultural norms in every different society in the world. Um, and I think that's a really important piece that we need to talk about on a broader scale, right? Is, you know, you can, like you said, you can tell a man that, it's better to be more vulnerable, it's better to be more in touch with his emotions. But if the society, if the culture doesn't allow for that, then it's a really difficult ask, right?
Mm,
And so I think that's an important thing to consider is, changes are happening all over the world at different rates. Different cultures change at different speeds. Um, and, things shift in unique and very personal ways. And so I think that's a really important part of this conversation as well, is not just, asking each individual man to change, but also talking about the whole culture. And also your point about, men first feeling comfortable sharing and getting support from other men is so important as well, right? Having male mentors, older men who then can normalize the experience of talking about mental health, taking your mental health seriously. And I think that's where the gender norms have started to shift. I mean, in America, at least a little bit, and in England and other countries as well, of Australia, of men starting to take on the role of that conversation of changing the gender dynamics for younger men. So it's really a male-led movement
mm,
of older men saying, like, hey, the way I grew up or the way my dad emulated, his emotions to me, sure, maybe I never saw my dad cry, but I sure did hear him yell a lot. I sure did hear his anger all the time. He wasn't afraid of that emotion. And so again, it's, emotions are not the enemy. It's, are you able to express yourself as a full human being in
mm,
a way that you are teaching your children that it's okay for them to be full humans, and access emotions in a healthy way, whatever emotion it is, right? Like you said, being able to be vulnerable, showing your kids image of a loving parent who loves his wife, who is a solid, adult leader in the home. Sometimes it might be crying, sometimes it might be joy, sometimes it might be wisdom. But often, just a lot of men have experienced only feeling anger from their dads, and that seeing that as like the only appropriate expression of male emotion, um, which is, it's not a full perspective, right? Which is damaging to mental health to only have little bits and pieces rather than the full spectrum.
mm, mm. And still on the conversation of gender dynamics, you've highlighted that you highlighted the need of for men to navigate these new dynamics. So can you elaborate on the skills and understanding men need to develop?
Well, okay, for example, like I talk about in the book of, in the past, men being the primary financial provider was something that was, kind of standard in a lot of cultures. The dad went out to work, or he went out and, made the money, bring home the bacon. But now, again, this is one of the gender dynamics that has changed is, the reality of a single income household is not always possible. And so to be able to not just rely on being the sole financial provider, but also being able to participate in a relationship where maybe there's two incomes and then there's two parents that have to juggle, being there for their kids or showing up in other ways at home is one of the biggest changes in gender dynamics over the last 50 years. Is dual income households.
And you spoke about a very important thing that as the society that we haven't, I would say that have accepted in a way of the thing of women having that helping hand because, and I've seen in the West how it is, but here in this side in South Africa, we still have that thing of a woman shouldn't work. A woman should be stay at home in terms of that. So it's quite tricky in a way. Definitely, there are audiences, there are listeners who are definitely all over the world listening to this. And how can one just, in terms of taking the step of men, then of normalizing of I would say that of being in with the new norms of what is acceptable within the society.
I think it's an ongoing, evolving conversation. But the first thing that I emphasize in my book is the importance of knowing what you want as a man, as a person, as a human, and not just doing something because you think you're supposed to do it, right? Because having a relationship takes a lot of work. It's a huge commitment. And, having children, same thing. It's a huge commitment. So that's something is just be aware of if you're ready to do that, if you're ready to make that commitment, because that's a big ask. And that is the first thing I always want to emphasize is, especially for even mental health, like doing something because you want to do it, because you're excited to do it, because you're invested in it, because you're committed to it, because you're, eager to see how you can contribute is different than going into something because you think you're supposed to, because you think you have no choice, because you're being pressured. And that's where sometimes mental health does suffer because at the end of the day, feeling empowered and in charge of your own life is really important.
And also, it just keep on bringing up those important points. And aside from just men in terms of men, is that thing of people thinking that I should do this because that certain influencer did that, or everyone is doing it. That thing of self-care, everyone is doing it. One thing that I realized about self-care, everyone does a different in a different way, and it works different from them. And if you thinking that taking a bath, sitting in a bath, holding your wine, and you think that it would work for you, it might not work for you as individuals. So it's something that's the thing that you need to accept. It goes back to that thing of as much as other people might go to therapy, that doesn't mean therapy will work for you. Same thing with medicine, with meds. If a certain person takes meds, don't think that those same meds will work for you. And it's something that, like I've learned, I saw an interview today where this guy said that when it comes to look when it comes to pills for depression, anxiety, there are different combinations. Whereas a certain person looks in terms of not they don't know what works for them, but they are trying, and it is really costly in terms of that. I just want to talk about the song model and the song model. So can you break it down for us in terms of what does it mean to the audience who are not familiar with it?
Well, I just want to speak to what you said real quick about, I 100% agree, right? And that's part of what I want to emphasize is but figure out what works for you.
Mm.
Right? Don't just say, well, I tried that worked for so-and-so, or this influencer said that doesn't resonate with me. Don't just focus on what's not working. Like, dedicate time and energy to yourself to figure out what does work, because at the end of the day, every person deserves to live a healthy and empowered life. Right? And so if you're struggling with depression, if you're struggling with anxiety, and you're like, okay, well, I don't think that works, or that medicine, I tried it, or therapy might not be my thing, that's fine. But figure out what does work for you, because you deserve to have a healthy and full life. So that would be something I would just emphasize.
Really important, really important.
Yeah.
And also the question in terms of what does the strong model mean? Can you elaborate more on
Yeah,
it?
absolutely. So STRONG is an acronym of, just the things that make a difference when it comes to having a healthy relationship. And strong is an easy word to remember, and strong is healthy, right? Because sometimes what I found was, healthy is a big word, it's a big concept, but breaking it down into these 6 letters. So S is safety. Having a safe relationship is the first step. Trust is so important in a long-term relationship. You have to be able to trust your partner, and they have to be able to trust you. I mean, that's kind of foundational. And then the R is respect, having mutual respect for each other in the relationship. And then, so that's kind of the first fundamental pieces of the puzzle of a healthy relationship is safety, trust, and respect. If you don't have safety, trust, and respect in your relationship, it's probably not going to be healthy. And then once you have that under your belt, going into kind of what makes a relationship not just good, but great, is that openness, nurturing, and generosity, where you are open, you can be yourself with your partner, you genuinely know that your partner likes you, you can talk about, your futures together, you can be open about your hopes and dreams. They're able to work with you when you have any kind of conflict. They're not your enemy. They want to collaborate with you. They're open to being flexible, changing their opinion, changing their mindset, working together with you to find good solutions. Nurturing, that both of you, again, if you choose to have a family, you have investment into creating a family that you will be proud of. That's the nurturing piece. And then generosity is just kind of what I call like the fairy dust of a healthy relationship, is, that little extra piece of thinking about your partner, going out of your way to giving them a little bit of affection. The things that, just it's a little special. It's the magic of a healthy relationship.
And through you actually explaining it, and as you've said that in terms of getting in a relationship is quite hard, and it took me back in terms of how I have looked upon relationships and now, and it really makes sense in terms of if you don't have all these things, a relationship is bound to, I would say, fail. And something as men, we don't, in a way, some of the things that we look at, for example, safety, which is a norm, trust is quite difficult in a way. Actually, one of the things that I realized that I've seen myself, it's being open, talking about mental health, not knowing that how this certain person will react to if I tell her about my problems. So, in your experience as a therapist, what are some of the main things that you have seen men don't have?
Well, I think a lot of people don't have it. I mean, this is part of why I went to therapy also myself, is I didn't know how to have a healthy relationship. I didn't, these things are not taught in school. And so I think that's the thing I really want to emphasize, is what I want to share is the hope of skill building. One thing I've come to know about a lot of men is, they're very action oriented. They're very logical. They want to know the steps. They want to know the skills and the tools. Like, how do I do it? I don't want to just hear about the problem. I also want to hear about the solution. And so part of me, writing this book is also, you can't jump to openness if you're with somebody who doesn't respect you, who you don't trust, and you don't feel safe with. That's when you will find somebody who will use it against you, right? But if you start with that, you feel safe with them, you trust each other, you learn to trust each other, you feel respected by them. Like maybe you did share with them a little bit about your history and your past, and they don't look at you any differently. If anything, they look at you and they're like, wow, you're so brave for sharing this with me. I respect you so much for, being somebody who is brave enough to address these things and then talk about them and share your story. That's going to be somebody who you're going to feel confident being open with. Right. And so that's kind of why I wanted to break these things down into kind of a formula of, if you're a man and you're like, I don't even know where to start. Like there's so many different messages on social media. There's so many different, people saying this and that. This is my kind of offering of like, look, start with finding somebody who you feel safe with, somebody who's not going to use something against you, somebody who even in a conflict is not going to call you names, is not going to, raise their voice or throw things at you. They're able to, still use their words and moderate their bodies. They're able to let you know, like what they need in order to repair. Somebody who you can trust, who you don't have to be checking up on or feeling like they're sneaking around on you. Somebody who's trustworthy, that if they give you their word is their bond, and you can build that trust with them. Somebody who respects you and you respect them. Once you have all of that, the openness kind of comes easier.
And you really mentioned something that healthy relationships. And I feel like I just want to take it in terms of these modern days, in terms of the relationships. What I've seen is the fact that people have switched things up. Things that are toxic are seen as healthy. And also when it comes to relationships, and it's quite fascinating the strong acronym, because it really goes deeply in terms of, are you as an individual, an individual, are you willing to be in a healthy relationship, or are you just want to be in this facade in terms of, no, in this relationship I'm in a healthy relationship, whereas there's no trust, there's no respect. Two things that I have seen that I have come across and realized that this thing won't work for me, because two things that they are very important. If I can't trust you, what's the use of me being in a relationship with you? And respect, something that we all need to have. It should be a necessity, not just in relationships, but in overall when you engage with people. Because I feel like that's how most, I would say, men, in terms of having that low self-esteem, not thinking that they will achieve things because at home they are not respected. At home they feel like when they go home they feel like they are in prison. In terms of those things, it's something that as individuals we need to, as I would say, people like me who are mental health advocates, people like you who are in this field, in terms of emphasize in that thing. And speaking about the thing of respect and trust, how the most worst thing that men ha- well, how can I put this, haven't mastered is emotional intelligence. One of the things that I in emotional intelligence and self-awareness, one of the things that I keep on emphasizing whenever I talk about this conversation, I would say that to 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 I guess, how can men master this thing, self-awareness and intelligence?
Yeah, and that's such a good point, because self-awareness, I think that's part of what, again, it doesn't have to be a therapist, but it's difficult to be self-aware in a vacuum, right? It's like first you can start with self-knowledge and self-investigation, asking yourself some deep questions, but then asking friends and getting feedback from your community or from trusted mentors or from a therapist of, how do you perceive me? How am I showing up? I think I'm showing up with integrity, but is that your experience of me? Because that's also really where, I've seen where people are not respected in their home. Sometimes it's because their partner is just not interested in respecting them, and it's not a healthy relationship. But sometimes it's people are not showing up within their own integrity, right? That their word really is, they're not holding themselves accountable to what they say they're going to do. They're not showing self-respect with, bettering themselves or seeking out, mentorship or community. And that's really that piece of, you can be self-aware in a bubble up to a point, and then kind of getting that feedback from a trusted friend or elder or mentor or therapist who can then reflect yourself back to you is also that other important piece, because that's what ends up happening in a relationship, right? If you're not self-aware, your partner's going to reflect all these things back to you, and you may believe it or you may not, but it can kind of throw your head a little bit for a loop if you're not really sure who you are, right? So that's also something. Yeah.
Identity is very important of knowing who you are and what you are. Two of the things that
Absolutely.
I've seen that are very important. For example, I had a guest where we spoke about that she was diagnosed with cancer stage 4, and she was told that she had 4 months to live. And one thing that a piece of advice that she left with me is the fact that sometimes it's about other people's perspectives. And for example, for men who don't have who have a low self-esteem and don't have confidence, I believe that the reason why they don't have that confidence is the fact that that one person said to them, "You are not worth it. You are not man enough." Just their opinion, it's just their perspective. It is not your own fault. And
Yeah.
we can't talk about men without mentioning masculinity more in depth. So how do so, societal expectation of masculinity impacts men's mental health and their approach of to relationship?
I mean, it plays a huge role, right? Because, it kind of can set a set of expectations that can be a burden to some men, right? If the expectation is, like men are always like they're always the high earners, or they're always, very strong and unemotional, or whatever the perspective is of masculinity that gets placed on a man, it becomes his burden unless he has his own sense of masculinity from within himself, developed from his own self-discovery, his own self-awareness, and his own, I guess, what I call his internal sense of self-mastery, right? And that's really where the confidence comes from, of like, hey, you can tell me all these ideas about what you think a man should be, what you think a man should do, what you think a kind of, this is a real man, this is not. But I know what kind of man I am, and that's the guy I show up as every day. And I show up in my integrity, and I don't follow, like nobody. I know who I am, and I am self-led, and I am self-mastered, and every day I check myself, and I show up in my own beliefs, and my values inform my choices and how I show up, right? Nobody else can tell you what kind of a man you're supposed to be. You have to decide that for yourself, and then that's where your confidence shows up, right? Then like you said, if somebody else is like, well, you're not a man, you're like, you don't even know me, right? I know me. Like, what are you saying, right? And yeah, and that's really where that self-confidence and that healthy, sense of mental, like your mental health comes from that. Like, I know what kind of man I am, so your words don't impact me, right? I stand in my integrity every day. My values inform how I show up with my wife, with my children, with my parents, with my community. I get to decide what kind of man I am. And that's, to me, that's the strongest position, right? Because then you're like, nobody else can tell you nothing.
Actually, one of the things that I believe that really defines a man is that sense of values, of knowing that
Mm-hmm.
you will never cross this line. You will never cross
Mm-hmm.
this line because of a certain value. And it's it's quite something that you just said. It's something that I believe that as much as to someone that don't also to men out there who don't have that self-confidence is the fact of that sense of love, that sense of, I would say, how can I put it? That sense of wanting that validation. And also, it really, another thing that takes very impact of its child trauma and not being seen
Mm-hmm.
enough at
Mm-hmm.
home, not
Mm-hmm.
being heard enough. And I feel like that's
Mm-hmm.
where men struggle with. Something
Mm-hmm.
that I feel like as an individual we need to look at in a way, but at the same time, people have their own way of responding to traumas, and some people want to
Mm-hmm.
talk about it, some people don't want to talk about it. And as much as
Mm-hmm.
we wouldn't afraid, in much as we want to help as much as we can, but if the
Mm-hmm.
person is not ready to talk about their own
Yeah,
trauma, you can't force them.
totally. Yeah, absolutely. And I 100% agree that, it's, you don't have to talk about your trauma to process it, but it is important to understand how traumatic experience impacted you,
Mm,
right? Because trauma, what it does, it changes our brain, right? And so let's say if you grew up in a home where, you had an abusive parent, some parent who called you, names, or they said you weren't smart, or they said you were weak, or they made fun of you, that can lead to negative beliefs about yourself,
mm,
right? And so, sure, you can go talk about that with a therapist, you could go talk about that with a friend, or, you don't have to do that, but you do have to sit down with yourself and say, how did that impact me? What are the negative beliefs I've internalized about myself after going through that kind of experience?
mm,
And how does that still impact the way I look at myself or the way I, interact in relationships, um, in my life today? And that's really the piece of moving forward. It's not, oh, you have to talk about your trauma, but it is, you need to sit down and kind of discover for yourself what impact it had on you. Because if you don't, it is going to impact the way you show up. You're just not going to be aware of it, which is, again, that self-awareness piece,
mm, mm.
right?
And I also believe that sometimes we, as men, but not only men, but as people, we don't realize that we went through a trauma and we don't recognize it.
Mm-hmm.
In a way, we think that it's just another bad day in business, and not realizing that it really affects us. Trauma,
Mm-hmm.
I have seen that. I've spoken with people that have overcome trauma, and it's something
Mm-hmm.
that's quite hard. I don't know, like. And
Mm-hmm.
do you have, in terms of closing remarks on today's conversation?
Mm. Yeah, I first of all, thank you for this conversation. It's been, very interesting. It's lots of good things. We could, I'm sure, keep talking. Um,
Yeah.
But I think a lot of the stigma against like talking about trauma is the idea that it's like a disease or like it's mental illness or something like that. And I always want to emphasize, no, trauma is mental injury. You were injured, and injuries can heal when you take the time to give yourself care and healing. So, it's like if you broke your ankle, that would be physical trauma. If you just walked it off and pretended like it didn't hurt, over time, that ankle is not going to heal correctly. You might have pain in walking, then it's going to move up to your hip, and then you're going to have back pain. And that's kind of the same thing, right? If you don't address your mental trauma, that injury is going to have lasting effects.
Mm,
So don't be afraid to address the injury that you've suffered, because healing is possible.
mm, mm, mm. I just want to say thank you so much for being here.
Yeah. Absolutely.
to take your time and expertise to just have a conversation with our mental mental. I really appreciate your time and your expertise, and I really learned a lot today, and more especially the strong acronym. It's quite
Yeah.
it's something that I believe that everyone should have. And
Mhm.
before I let you go, do you have where can people get you in terms of your book?
So my book is on Amazon. It's on Audible, on Amazon, on ebook, or you can go to my website. It's just www.strong.love.